It's 4 o'clock in Los Angeles. It's 6 o'clock in Chicago. And it's 7 p.m. in New York City. Hello, everybody. I'm Mad Dog the Scipio. The pit bull is off tonight. She's shopping. What's what she wants to do? That's what she's going to do. She's shopping tonight. Amelia, buy me something good. Tonight, we have a very special episode, a return to Alcatraz with Ken Widner and Mike Lynch, the authors of the definitive book, The Last Word on Alcatraz. Alcatraz, The Last Escape, written by my guest tonight, Ken Widner and marvelous Mike Lynch. Gentlemen, how the hell are you? It's been a while since I've seen you.
Doing great.
All right. Yeah.
Good.
Thank you for having us back.
Well, I had to have you back. First of all, we were talking off the air just a moment ago. It's tough to do an Alcatraz show in one or two shows. I need like a month worth of shows just to cover what the guys did while they were there, that's the story in itself. I never found out something that really critical too. How the hell did you guys meet? Mike, you're on the West Coast.
Yep.
And Ken, you're here like closer to me on the East Coast. But you put a book together. How did you guys write a book bi-coastally? Is that a word, bi-coastally?
Yeah.
I just made one up. How did you guys put this together?
Well, I'll tell some of the story. Mike can tell the other part of the story. In 2016, I had decided to write a screenplay based upon the knowledge that I had from stories that my family had been telling me, my uncles, my aunts, some of the research that I had done. And I put one together and tried to kind of, slip it into Clint Eastwood's hands, which I did get it into someone who works for him. And, about that time, Mike reached out to me. He was like, hey, I'd love to meet you, love to talk. At the time, I was not really kind of interested in doing anything.
Yeah.
And Mike was pretty persistent. He kept reaching out to me, and we started out trying to do some work together, and some circumstances separated us for a little bit, but eventually fate brought us back together, and Mike convinced me it was time to write a book, and I was like, I've been wanting to tell the story ever since 2012. And so I tried, going through the media. I tried doing TV shows, and I never really could land the platform to tell this story. Yeah. And Mike said, I can help you write the story and tell it. And so from there, it's history, from this book. So Mike's probably got a different take on it.
How long into that, Ken, did the media pick up on it?
Well, we did something in 2015 with the History Channel, and I really thought that was going to be an avenue for us to tell this story, and we were a little disappointed in what happened. I mean, they did a 2-hour documentary. I was very pleased with that. We thought more was going to come out of it for us to really go into a detailed piece of it. Yeah, and that never kind of happened. And then along the way, I would meet people that would say, "Oh gosh, I can help you get the story out." And I would tell them the story, and they would tell me how great it was, and just nothing ever really kind of happened. And I was really kind of getting frustrated. I really didn't think this was ever going to occur. And Mike was like a bloodhound. He kept coming after me, telling me, "Hey, I can help you do this. I can direct you. I can be a part of it." And eventually he kind of won me over, and we partnered together, and what came out was, I think, truly amazing.
I'm glad he persisted, but he's got a pipeline to God too, and that don't hurt. Mike, let me bring you in over here, brother. First of all, nice to see you again. Good to be back. Having you on the show. So talk to me about this joint venture with Ken Widner, the magical powers of persuasion that you seem to have over people.
Well,
How did you
I
get this
I
thing
first
going?
heard of Ken. I didn't know who he was until 2015 when he did the documentary, and I watched it on the History Channel because I had an interest in Alcatraz.
I saw the same show. Yeah.
Growing up in the Bay Area, everyone knows about it. You go to San Francisco, it's sitting there in the middle of the bay. You can't miss it. And in the early 80s, I visited the island as a tourist and, was amazed by the story and the prison and so forth, like most people.
Yeah.
So when I saw the documentary, I was amazed because, they produced evidence that hadn't been seen before, the famous photograph of John and Clarence in South America in the 1970s.
That photograph, Mike, will be the subject of some debate and speculation tonight. We're going to talk at length about that.
We have a lot to say about the photograph. And then
I got a lot to say about it too. We'll talk tonight.
Just some other stories, from the family and the Alfred Anglin connection, the third brother. There's John and Clarence and Alfred, and his part of the story. And I knew, even though it was a 2-hour documentary, which is pretty good length to tell a story, I knew there was a lot more to say.
Oh, sure.
And I thought, I want to be a part of the story. I want to help Ken tell the story and find out more and really definitively decide what really happened. Where did they go and how do we know they survived? And so I reached out to him, and like he said, he was not initially enthusiastic about doing a collaboration because, he didn't know who I was, and he didn't know what I brought to making this happen. I said I was a writer, but how good of a writer am I? And plus,
pretty damn good, kid.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I wasn't sure if he was a U.S. Marshal or
right. He didn't know I was working for the authorities under the guise of I'm a writer. I can help.
Before.
Right.
I got news for you. We're going to talk about that. You guys are you're laying the foundation, whether you know it or not. You're laying the foundation for what I already have on this paper here. I want to get into this right now because it's critical that we talk about, and forget the speculation, just the escape itself. Just the escape itself would have made great fodder for a book. And then you weave into it gangsters and strippers and bank robbers and more gangsters like Whitey Bulger and Mickey Cohen, who I'm alive, by the way, because of Mickey Cohen. He gave my father the money that saved my life when I was a kid. So you'll not hear me. You will never hear me knock a gangster because they're my kind of people. For real. But we are going to talk about all these moving parts. You're talking about greed, lust, sex, double crosses, triple crosses, people getting promised one thing and delivered something else. I mean, this is a who's who of whatever could go wrong did. That's the foundation for Escape from Alcatraz.
Right.
However, when it comes down to it, it's 3 guys primarily. There were others that helped, but it's 3 guys that will forever have cemented their place in history. I believe they all got out. I believe they all got off. I believe Clarence and John went one way and Frank took a powder the other way. I can't prove that, but I don't think they stayed together maybe 5 minutes, and that would be about it.
Nope. No, I can prove that they did.
Yeah. So Ken, we're going to start this off with you.
Okay.
The name Fred Breezy has been bannered about and talked about almost ad nauseum when it comes to the Alcatraz story. But yet other information I read has him almost as a footnote to the story. So let us either cement his legacy or chop the shit out of it. So let's talk about Fred Breezy. Is he an overplayed participant? How significant was Fred Breezy in all of this?
I would say the escape would not have been successful if it had not been for Fred Breezy. Fred Breezy was the cog in the wheel that allowed them. If it had not been for Fred Breezy, they never would have met Mickey Cohen to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
They never would have had that connection, to help them financially when they were planning this escape. And then, of course, Fred Breezy is the one who flies them out of California into Mexico, and then eventually out of Mexico into Brazil. He is the one who keeps them informed throughout all of the years, the different activities that their family had. I mean, he was instrumental in bringing them back for his for their mom's funeral, for their dad's funeral. He was the one that kept the family information flowing to them. So I would almost kind of say, without him, I'm not sure the escape would have happened and been as successful as it was. They would have gotten out of prison and they would have gotten into the Bay. But as far as getting out of the country as fast as they did, if it had not been for Fred Breezy, they would not have gotten out that fast.
So it's fair to say that he was a rather influential go-between.
He was a very important piece in the escape puzzle. He went up under the radar for a long time.
Oh yeah! Oh boy, did he!
And the U.S. Marshals and the FBI had no clue that he was a part of it. Even after
let's
they
talk
found
about
out,
that.
Okay.
That's the one thing, and thank you for bringing that up, Ken. That's the one thing that's never, ever been mentioned, and not at any great length anyway, is his name is all over the escape story. It's all over it.
Right.
Why? You would think, hey, I want to talk to this guy. Nobody even said boo to him.
Nobody knew anything about Fred Breezy.
I'm flabbergasted.
No one knew anything about Fred Breezy until around like 1991, the early part of 1992, when he accidentally, as he would say, stepped in a trap with the U.S. Marshals when he called into Inside Edition. They were doing, not Inside Edition,
America's Most Wanted.
America's Most Wanted. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
One of the U.S. Marshals that was working the case at that time was doing a show with America's Most Wanted, and they were doing a show on the Escape from Alcatraz. And Fred Breezy accidentally called in because he thought, as in his own words, he thought that the brothers had been caught. And so he called in, and they kept him on the line long enough to trace his call. And as soon as they traced his call, they came and picked him up.
Wow.
And they point blank asked him, okay, where are they? And he said, I could, if I was there, I could drive you to it. I can't draw it on a map, but I could drive. He was basically trying to stonewall. But they went down into Brazil looking for them based upon the information that he gave.
No kidding.
Oh, yes,
that's crazy. Mike, got to bring in here, Mike.
Sure.
Pick it up where Ken left off. Okay, so Fred, he's an important cog in the wheel. When does he use up his viability? Is he no longer persona non grata?
What do you mean by that exactly?
Okay, when does his name leave the story?
It never really does. He
That's the answer I was looking for.
Yeah. See, the thing with Fred Breezy is he actually grew up with the brothers in Ruskin, Florida. He was friends with them from a very early age.
Okay.
Probably when he was around 7 or 8. That's when he meets the brothers, and they become fast friends because the Anglin family was very poor. They were very poor farmers.
Right.
The kids were bullied in school because they didn't, they had patched up clothes, they didn't have any money. They were kind of the lower economic area or part of, of the area. And so there were people there that had some more money than they did, a little bit higher standard of living. And so they're looking down on them. And so the brothers basically stopped going to school when they were like 4th, 5th grade because they just, were getting into fights. They were just getting harassed, and they just had kind of had it. Well, Fred Breezy, even though his father, he was an electrician, and he, they were kind of more middle-class family. They had more money and higher up socially. Fred Breezy just connected with the brothers. He didn't care, where they came from or what their life was like. And the brothers really embraced that. And so for, their growing up years, they had similar interests. They loved to swim. They loved to hang out. They didn't like school very much.
Right.
They'd get into trouble together, kind of small time, break into, steal car batteries, break into stores for, quick money kind of stuff. And Fred was a part of that. They were in and out of, boys' schools and reformatory schools and, short prison stints here and there for small time stuff. So they had a lot that they connected with. Well, later, Fred in his 20s became a pilot, got his pilot's license, and that's how he later connects with Mickey Cohen. He became a drug runner for him from Mexico. Right. Shipping marijuana and other drugs, but primarily it was marijuana. And through Fred Breezy, he says, "Hey, I know some guys who are really great farmers." And so they started growing marijuana on their farm in Ruskin. And that's how they connect with Cohen. It was through Fred Breezy who introduced them. And then they were going to try and manage a farm for Mickey Cohen themselves in Mexico. And at that point, Fred kind of sort of leaves the picture for a little bit. He kind of goes in a different direction than the brothers. And then, of course, they try because of the Kennedy brothers, who were really going after organized crime in the late 50s.
Oh, please don't get me started on them two jamokes, please.
Right. And so because of the heat that Cohen was facing under the investigations and the trials and the hearings and everything, he kind of shuts down his operations, and that's what forced the brothers to rob the bank in Colombia in 1958. And they get arrested, they get caught, they get arrested, and eventually are sent to ultimately Leavenworth. They try to escape Leavenworth, and then when they're caught, they're sent to Alcatraz. Yeah. And then later, not long after that, Mickey Cohen is arrested for tax evasion. Is sent to Alcatraz as well. And so they reconnect with Mickey Cohen. And then that's when the brothers and Alan West and Frank Morris start hatching their plan for the escape. They eventually explore different ideas. And ultimately they decided once you got out of the jail cells and, to the water, that's when they decided that Mickey Cohen would provide a boat for them. And then it was Fred who flew him down to Mexico. So they reconnect with Fred during their stint in Alcatraz through their other brother, Robert, who was also known as Man. He was Man Anglin. Ken refers to him as Uncle Man. And because of his pilot's license and his connection to Mickey Cohen, he sets up the flight after the night of the escape, picks him up, flies him down to Mexico. They're there for a couple of years. And then the brother Alfred, who's at Kilby prison, dies under questionable circumstances. Officially, he died while trying to escape. He touched the electrical fence and dies of electrocution. They also had an electric chair, and it's our assertion that he died of interrogation techniques by the FBI, trying to get information about his brothers, because he had admitted to his cellmate and to other people that he knew where the brothers were, then that they were alive after the escape. And during the interrogation, he dies. Fred Breezy tells the brothers in Mexico that this had happened, and they don't know if he's talked or revealed their location. And then Fred flies them down to Brazil. And then for the next 25 years, Robert, or Man, goes to Brazil from time to time to visit the family. They share information, what's going on with the family. That he tells the family what's going on with the brothers. from time, just sort of keeps the connection with the family going indirectly.
Now, Mike,
it's Fred who does the flying back and forth.
But Mike, at the time, does the United States have an extradition treaty with Brazil?
No.
So there's no extradition treaty. So they have to stay there.
Yes.
At what point, if you know, do they make their way out of Brazil and back to the U.S.? And is it under, cloak and dagger, under the cover of night? Does Breezy pick them up and fly them back at an undisclosed location? How did they end up here again, and where do they go? Because they're clearly very high-profile criminals at this point, despite the fact that, by the way, folks, it's interesting. I don't know if you know this, Ken, but if I have the arrest record of John and Clarence, and believe it or not, Clarence has much more on his record than John does.
Oh yeah. Well, in fact, when they robbed the bank in Alabama, Clarence and Alfred both were already on the run from a previous escape from a state prison in Florida. So they were already on the run, and that's one of the reasons why on the federal time, that Clarence and Alfred would get 15 years and John got 10 years.
And the other thing that surprises me is that it's all kind of like petty charges, vagrancy, petty larceny, nothing breaking and entering, B&Es. But
the bank robbery was the biggest. The bank robbery was the biggest piece that they ever tried to do in their criminal past.
And go figure they get caught, right?
Yes, and they got caught.
The one time they tried to pull off the big kahuna, and they got popped.
They would have gotten away if it had not been for John seeing a married woman and her husband turning them in.
Well, that's a whole nother part of the story. We're going to get there. Oh man, the Escape from Alcatraz. This is our return to Alcatraz with Mike Lynch and Ken Widner. The book. You got to get this book, guys. Got to get it. It's Alcatraz, The Last Escape. And if you can't get it, I'll get it for you, by God, because I got the hookup here. I want to talk about how, Ken, I want to talk about how John and Clarence make their way back into the U.S. I'm guessing it's, a cover of night, undisclosed location, probably somewhere that no one would suspect, the Montana or Nebraska. The least place you'd expect to find an escapee of Alcatraz Island.
Actually, it was only about 10 miles from their home that they grew up in. Fred Breezy, when he would fly out of Florida down into Colombia, where he would ferry drugs back across, there was a little airstrip in a town just east of Ruskin called Waimama. And it has a little bitty airstrip. And that's actually where he gets caught in 1976. He crashes his plane while he's trying to land. But that airstrip is where he brings the brothers back anytime that they needed to come back to the U.S.
Yeah.
And, I've had people say, well, why would they chance coming back and getting caught? And in 2015, when I was working with Art Roderick, who is the U.S. Marshal, during the show, we were doing a filming out in San Francisco, and we were talking about this very subject. And I told Art, I said, right now, John could walk by us on the street, and you would not even know who he was, because after a couple of years, your features change a little bit. They grew beards. I mean, and you didn't, at that time, you didn't have facial recognition software like you do at an airport today, that they come through and they go, okay, that's such and such we're looking for. And by the way, they didn't even go use commercial airlines. They had their own private airplane.
Yeah.
So they just basically flew in. No one was looking for them at that time. I mean, after 10 years, I don't think their authorities were even really kind of seriously looking for them.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because, and one of the things I wanted to talk to both of you about the last time didn't permit was the fact that Alcatraz was closed the year after they escaped in 1963. They were out of there. They were done.
Right.
Let's just call a spade here. Did anybody really give a shit at that point? Did they really even care?
Yeah,
that anyone had escaped, or because most of them were either, rehoused, pardoned, furloughed. I mean, there were any number of things that happened to the Alcatraz prisoners that remained on the rock at the time the federal government said, okay, shut the doors. We'll close everybody, we'll close it up.
I will say this, there was already talk going around even before the escape that they were going to shut Alcatraz down because it was a very expensive prison to maintain. Every single thing that they had to be brought into the island, including the water.
Mike, it had been on the chopping block for probably 6 years before they actually closed it.
But I would say there were still people trying to argue in Congress, in the Senate, especially like J. Edgar Hoover. They were trying to argue for the prison. I believe the escape was kind of like the nail in the coffin. And when the escape occurred, it definitely did not help in the argument about why we needed to keep a prison out in the middle of San Francisco Bay. And so that pretty much, you could say it was already in talks before the escape, but I believe the escape was like the nail in the coffin to it.
We are going to talk about the aforementioned famous photograph that Mike Lynch referred to. Before we do that, however, I got to pay some bills here with my sponsor. We'll be right back. Do you have sweaty balls or volleyball netty balls? It's time to make them ready balls. The Manscaped.com Lawnmower 3.0 will do the job and clean your knob with its patented no-nick head, so your head will function as desired. Enter promo code WrestlingFuture for a generous 20% discount. That's enter WrestlingFuture for a 20% discount. Manscaped.com and Wrestling with the Future, going balls to the walls with Manscaped.com and the Lawnmower 3.0. Your balls will thank you, and so will we.
Your customers expect to buy what they want, how they want. So you need a commerce platform that's flexible, customizable, and crazy fast. Shopify Plus is built to handle the complexity of your business, so you can focus on your brand and deliver a seamless customer experience across every device, country, and channel. Save time by turning manual tasks into powerful automated workflows. Target key markets with local currencies and unlimited storefronts. Increase conversion with personalized shopping and checkout experiences. And sell out in seconds, knowing we won't hold you back. Partner with the best commerce platform.
We are back. WWTF Radio 88.7 is globally live and around the world. We are on Armed Forces Radio and the broadband radio system. Internationally, oh my God, where are we? We're everywhere. We're like horse shit. We're spread everywhere. We are returning to one of my favorite places to be, Alcatraz Island. A return to Alcatraz. The Escape from Alcatraz has been written. It's been immortalized in film, several films, as a matter of fact, including Escape from Alcatraz and The Rock, with various and sundry actors, well-known and unknown. One of the things that comes up, however, whenever a book or film about Alcatraz is written, is the accuracy of it, Ken Widner. And one of the things you and I spoke about before we went on the air, and we're going to talk about a little bit of it now, is folklore versus reality. Mike, feel free to jump in here anytime. It is said that the biggest, the most egregious sin that the movie Escape from Alcatraz makes is the method of escape. The method of escape. They have, and it's just kind of laughable to think about. But if you watch the movie, they have the escapees blowing up a raft.
Right.
Okay. How realistic would it have been to blow up a raft and not get caught on Alcatraz Island? Notwithstanding the weather conditions on the night of the escape. Can you lend some credence here to this? Maybe they should have had you as a consultant, the creative consultant on the film. Talk to me. I want to talk about the reality versus folklore. What did they get wrong?
Well,
besides everything.
Yeah. It's like I said, I've always said that 95% of the movie was inaccurate. 5% was probably accurate. The one thing I will say about the movie, I enjoyed the movie. I'm a big Clint Eastwood fan.
Oh yeah.
I thought the movie was awesome. The one thing that the family has always been so curious about is, if you were going to make a movie about somebody, would you not want to reach out to the family members and ask them anything about the characters that you were going to put into your movie? And not one time did Paramount or Clint Eastwood or anybody else who was directing that movie ever reached out to the family and said, hey, let me ask you about John and Clarence and what you think their role was in this escape. Now, I will say this, the one thing that Mike and I had as a luxury that we used very heavily, that the people who wrote and directed the Escape from Alcatraz was, they did not have access to the FBI files. Mike and I did. And so, they made speculations based upon who was the mastermind. They made Frank Morris to be the mastermind because the guy, and I actually talked to Richard Tuggle, who wrote the book, who wrote the original screenplay. And I asked him, I said, why did you make Frank Morris? And this was before I ever read the FBI files. I asked him, I said, why did you make Frank Morris the brains behind it? Or the mastermind? And he said, well, I only had one actor. And so I couldn't use one of the brothers. So I had to make it Frank Morris. And so as me and Mike start digging through.
So you FBI change files, historical history for that? Right. Are you fucking kidding me?
Yes. He made it Frank Morris because he only had one actor.
Well, then hire another actor. What the fuck?
I totally agree. But, as me and Mike went through and we read the interviews that the FBI did, not only with Alan West, but with other inmates, it quickly became, this was not Frank Morris's plan. This was John Anglin's plan. And
I want to talk to you about that. I want to talk to you about that.
Didn't even get included onto the escape until after it had already started.
You mentioned a name, old brother. You mentioned the name here, John West. I'm sorry, Alan West.
Alan West. Right.
Alan West is a guy that's often overlooked. He was heavily involved in the escape plan. Heavily involved from what I read. How much of what you got from the FBI was redacted? How much was...
Well,
how much could you read of the blacked out lines?
Yeah. The interview that they did with Alan West is not redacted at all. None of it.
Okay.
So, but I will say this. I believe that Alan West is probably overrated in the story. To the fact that, yes, as you read the book, the book that Mike and I wrote, you will find. Now, I'm not saying he didn't have an instrumental part. He did. So did Frank Morris. But there came a time where they did not trust Allen West. In fact, Frank Morris, according to Whitey Bulger, had plans to kill Frank Morris. To kill Allen West.
My understanding, Ken, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that Frank Morris didn't trust much of anybody. He was quite paranoid, it is said.
I would say he was probably very close to Whitey Bulger, because Whitey refers to him as Frankie, and he also called him Little Paco. They were very good friends. I believe
that would explain to me why he would be paranoid.
Yeah. I believe he was probably closer to the Anglin brothers than he ever was to Allen West.
Exactly. Mike, let me bring you up here. I'm going to pull you right in here over here. Going to switch places with Ken for a minute. Mike, let's talk about this a little bit. I have two pieces of information I want to discuss at length. And I know you've talked about it before, but I want to go in a little bit in depth here. This letter that was allegedly written by John Anglin, we know now that it's a forgery. It's a fake letter.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
How did this letter come to be? Do we know who wrote it? And has it been conclusively dismissed as a complete fake? And I have one question that will answer probably everything that you'll say here in just a moment. The person who wrote this letter volunteered to show up. They volunteered to show up. They were going to show their face. You got to have either a big set of balls to do that, or you got to be really fucking stupid.
Well, no one ever showed up, and the identity of the writer has never been established. But it was a handwritten letter. You have, you're showing up your little transcription there. That's just a transcribed copy. That's not the original or a copy of the original.
I have a copy of the original.
Right, it's a handwritten letter purported to be written by John. Fortunately, and we have this also in the book, is the both brothers wrote prison letters from Alcatraz back home. And fortunately, Ken's mother saved all those letters, and some of them, we have copies of them in the book, more than what was in the book. There's many more letters. And so we have ample samples of their handwriting, of John's and Clarence's handwriting. Of course, this letter was purported to be written by John. The handwriting does not match the details. If John was really willing to surrender himself, why would he surrender himself to the authorities? He was living in Brazil. Brazil has free medical care. So the medical care he would have received in Brazil would have been much, much, much better than surrendering himself to prison and having prison medical care, which is not substantial or highly regarded in most cases. Yeah. Or if he really did have cancer and his life was not going to be much longer, why would he not surrender himself to his family? Why wouldn't he not go to his family to say, here I am? All valid
questions, Mike. All valid questions. Let me tell you what I did, fellas. I sent a copy of the handwritten letter to a friend of mine that does forensic handwriting analysis. He believes that letter was written by two people. He believes that two people wrote that letter. And interestingly, he said he wouldn't dismiss John Anglin as one of those people, but he will tell you conclusively that two people, absolutely, he will put money on it, that he believes two people wrote that handwritten letter that starts with, "My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada." Have you ever been told that before, that maybe two people wrote that letter?
Yes.
Talk to me, Ken.
Well, so when we discovered the letter, the U.S. Marshal Services is the one who originally approached us and said, "Hey, we've got this letter that was delivered to a San Francisco newspaper. I believe it was like in 2010,
Right.
2011. And they held on to it. They just like Mike said, they did the research, trying to analyze the handwriting, never could match anything up. They pretty much wrote it off as not being legit, although they did hang on to it, and they gave it to us or told us about it in like 2017. But, you know, it's like I told Mike, and Mike just eloquently just said it. You know, my uncle would never, I mean, I know like my mom said, her two brothers would never have gone back to a place that they dreaded without reaching out to the family. I mean, at this point in time, when they were, you know, growing up, their family was very poor, but that's not the case today. And so if John was dying of cancer and he needed help, the first place he would have gone to would have been his family if he was in the United States.
Right.
But I agree with Mike. You know, why in the world would you leave a country that had free health care, you know, and you come back and you say, I want to go to a prison and get prison health care? I mean, does anybody really believe you're going to get quality health care?
No, I mean, there's so much about this letter that's inconsistent, that doesn't make sense. But when you have a guy who does forensic handwriting analysis for a living, and he says to you, two people absolutely wrote this, and I'm not going to discount one of the original people. And I think to myself, okay, well, which part did the original, you know, which part did supposedly did John write? And how much did the other guy, whoever the hell the other guy was, how much did he write? There's no way of knowing. That's the whole problem with forensic analysis. There's no way to tell who wrote what and whether they did it first or second. Yeah. Because you've got
I will say the US
mishmash on one page, you know?
Yeah, I will say the US Marshals are good at looking at handwriting. They not only have that letter, they had all of the letters. They have copies of the letters that John and Clarence wrote to their mom, and also wrote to
John
Alfred.
was
so they
big on sending cards, right? He was big on sending cards and postcards to people, that kind of thing, sent to his mother.
Well, you know, after they left the United States and went down into Brazil, they did correspond to my grandmother by Christmas cards. You know, every Christmas she got a Christmas card, and on her birthday she got roses all the way up until the day that she died, and they actually sent roses on the day that she died, also her funeral. But I'm just, you know, there was just nothing about that letter as I read it makes any sense whatsoever, and
it really doesn't.
No, we know throughout history, people have tried to involve themselves into the story, you know, whether or not
why
because
would
they want to
do that?
They want to be a part of the story for some reason.
I for the life of me don't understand why. It's such a convoluted, perplexing story. We got people in our chat room. Oh, Amelia is here, my co-host.
Oh,
hey, Amelia, you got questions for the boys? There she is. Are you done shopping, you shithead? Love the Manscaped ad. Leon's here. Amelia, questions for Mike and Ken. I'll have you on the show by proxy here. While Amelia's doing that, question I have for Mike. I'm just first a comment, then a question. Ken, how many people tell you look like John Anglin? Because you do resemble him.
Yeah, my mom has told me many, many times how I favor John Anglin.
Boy, do you, brother! You take that mustache away, you look just like him. And
if they ever make a movie, I will stand in as a double for him.
Brother, if you need a character reference, I'm your guy for that one. Because Mike Lynch looks like the BTK killer. He's going to play Dennis Rader in that movie.
He does, doesn't he?
I'm busting the balls.
Sure.
Question I have for you, Mike.
Okay.
What you and I have talked about on other shows. We've talked about the art of writing, the tempo of writing. How do you, when you have a true story like this that's got so many ins and outs and so many moving parts, I mean, there's all kinds of moving parts. Like I said, you've got gangsters and money and greed and sex and lust and strippers and bank robbers and all kinds of stuff going on here. How do you find the tempo in writing such a, let's just be honest about it, it's a convoluted piece. It's a very complex piece because you've got to lay all that foundation to get to the escape. Without that, the escape means nothing, because this is why they escaped, to get the fuck out of Dodge.
In the book, we spent a lot of time in the early chapters talking about the brothers and the family growing up. What was their life like? What skills did they have?
Right.
One of the things, for example, they used to do recreationally, they lived near a river where their house was, and the brothers were very good swimmers. They loved being in the water. That was another thing they shared with Fred Breezy. He loved being in the water and swimming and playing and hanging out. And so there was a lot of boating going on in the area because of the river, or I should say rivers.
Yeah.
And so what they used to do for fun was they used to tie ropes to the back of boats, unknowing to the drivers, and be towed in the middle of the river, and just, for fun. And they let the boat, the rope go, and then they wait for the next boat to come along. Yeah. Well, that skill plays itself out in the Alcatraz escape, because the night of the escape, we talked about Mickey Cohen having a boat waiting for him. Well, the problem was getting from the island to the boat, which was sitting in the middle of the bay between San Francisco and Alcatraz Island.
Yeah.
Well, they would have boats going out from the island, the transport boats going back and forth between the pier of San Francisco and the Alcatraz, transporting prisoner supplies, the guards and so forth, family members. So they knew when the boat was going to go out. And so they got there, they tied an extension cord to it and got towed to the middle of the bay, saw the boat waiting for him that Cohen had procured, and then, made their way to Fred Breeze and flew down to Mexico. That's one thing. Another thing was that John was an artist. He would paint. He knew how paints worked and mixing colors and so forth. Well, that was integral to what they needed for the escape, because they painted the dummy heads, which is very well known. I mean, they got that part right in the Clint Eastwood movie. They go into a lot of detail about the dummy heads,
right?
And also painting the back part of the cells. When they were digging the holes, they made those, cardboard covers to make it look like the grill was still there, and they painted that the color of the cell.
Yeah.
Another thing was, the Anglins had a very large family. There were 14 children altogether, and Clarence would cut their hair. He had hair cutting skills for his siblings. Well, at Alcatraz, he got the job as one of the barbers at Alcatraz, because they had very strict rules about how they carried themselves, and they had to have short hair.
How beautiful is that, to have access to sharp instruments?
Well, it was more the hair that they were looking for, not the scissors. It was the hair, because the hair are what made the dummy heads look authentic.
Yeah.
And so Clarence would sneak hair out from the barbershop into the cells and gave it to Clarence and Frank and Alan West. And then Alan West was the one that had the glue, and they would use the glue the hair to the dummy heads. So you have these skills that they had that we talk about in the beginning of the story that later play out in the escape.
Yeah.
And as far as the information, we have many photographs, we have court testimonies, court records, we have other documents, we have interviews with inmates and prisoners.
Yeah.
And you have to have you put all this evidence together, and you have to think, how can I tell this in story form where it leads to the next part of the story, and you have this evidence that backups our claims. So everything we're saying, they're not just our speculation. They're not just, third-party accounts. They're
right.
It's direct evidence. It's the FBI report. It's the photographs. It's the court transcripts. So everything we have is based on the truth, and we just put it in story form so that you just want to turn the page and find out what happens next.
Amelia has a great question for you guys. Beautiful question. Okay, my question is: did the letters that the mom received have code words in it that will let her know the letters were from her sons?
Yes.
Talk to me about that, Ken, because you and I both know the answer to that question. Um,
Well, I do know.
my
That,
understanding is that I'm sorry, but here's what I understand from reading doing the research, because we do extensive research here. One of the things that I understood was that Christmas was a particularly fond time for John. Not so much for Clarence, but for John. And John would put certain words in there to let his mother know how he was feeling, if he was okay, if he needed anything,
right.
or because he was the emotional one rather than Clarence, who was more analytical, kind of I don't know what words you want to use, but he wasn't the emotional type that John was. Talk to me about the words he used to convey to his mother that he was okay.
Well, the way that we found out about the code that they had with each other, Uncle Man shared it with a writer once about how that, because he was part of this knitted closeness, because there's really four brothers. Not you think of three, but really there was another one that wasn't really kind of part of all the criminal activity. But he shared to us how that they would communicate with each other by drawing lines on a piece of paper. Like for instance, 3 lines might mean they're planning something. 2.5 lines might mean that the plan is underway. They had ways of writing something in a letter. Like my mom actually said the other day when I was interviewing her, she said that they had ways of writing it in a way that you could read it and you wouldn't think anything about it.
Yeah.
But yet they knew when they read it what it meant. And so they had ways of looking at each other, giving each other like this certain type look. They would call and they would hang up after so many rings. That meant something. I mean, they had this code system that enabled them to communicate with each other, to the fact that even in the FBI files, Alfred, when he was in Atlanta prison, got a letter from the brothers telling him that they were planning an escape from Alcatraz. And at the time, he didn't believe that it could be a successful escape. But how is it that they were able to tell him that, and with no guard reading this letter ever saw it? You know, they had a way of communicating something to him that whenever a guard who got that letter, and I'm assuming just like any other letter at a prison, they open it up, they read it, they check for contraband, they check for any type of communication that's going on. And yet they let him know that they were planning an escape from Alcatraz even before it happened.
Remarkable. Yeah. Remarkable. Mike, you mentioned earlier this rather famous photograph. We're going to take a look at this picture. We got a lot to talk about. I wanted to save this to the end of the show because this is more than just a smoking gun. This is the source of so much controversy, especially now that it's been proven to be 99% accurate.
That's correct.
By someone at the FBI, I understand.
Well, so they had worked for the FBI.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at this picture.
Yep, that's it.
Okay. This is, and first of all, thank you to Ken Widner, because I got to see something, folks, that you'll never see. I get to see the original. I saw the original photograph that what you're looking at here. I want to tell you something. When you see 2 guys in a picture that you know was taken from someone, and there they are, it's hard to deny that they are real people. Yep. It's hard to deny that they look like who they say they are.
Yep.
So several things to say about the photograph.
Talk to me, Mike.
I'll talk about the peripheral things first, and then we'll get to the more conclusive evidence second.
Yes,
if
sir.
You look, so John's on the right, Clarence is on the left.
Yep.
If you look at John's left wrist, he's got the watch on his wrist.
Where's it up high?
Right. John wore his wristwatch not on the wrist, but on his forearm, which is very unusual. Most people don't wear their wristwatch on their forearm, but John did. And we have another photograph that was taken before he was arrested.
I can relate to that. I wear mine there as well.
There's a photograph of John he wore his watch in that manner in another photograph before, his incarceration at Alcatraz.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at Clarence on the left, you can just barely see it, but in his left shirt pocket, you can see sort of this square shape. Well, Clarence was a smoker, and there's other photographs.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's where he carried his cigarettes. And I mean, it's not conclusive proof it's him, but it was a practice of his. Mm-hmm. Or the way that he's sort of kind of hunched over a little bit and his hands are at his side, kind of curled.
Yeah.
Well, other photographs show him standing exactly the same way. The posture is identical to how he's standing in the photograph. And then, of course, you have the termite mounds in the background. That's, you can't miss the termite mound. Well, in the part of
that, Mike, I'm going to stop you there for just a moment because I want us to all have this conversation. Before we went on the air, I was under the impression, and thank you, Ken, for clarifying that we talked about these ant hills, basically is what they are, giant ant hills. These things are prominent in South America because first of all, the ants can carry away small children. That's how big they are, okay? And there are millions of them. I mean, there are just millions and millions of ants. One of the things about this picture that's been the source of controversy is the location. There are people who swear and be damned that they know that location here in the States, and others say, show me. Because I have never seen an anthill that's almost as big as John is, okay? Let me look at it. That's probably like as big as I am. I mean, I'm 5'3", and that's about my size. So
when Ken and I went down to South America, we did a show a couple of years ago in a certain part of Brazil, and there are termite mounds and hills. There are thousands of them. They're everywhere. We even have photographs of other termite mounds in the book. Yeah, of when we were down there. They're so commonplace. And when Fred Breezy went to the family in 1992, he made a recording to the family, and he's sharing when he met with them. And one of the things he specifically mentions are the termite mounds and how they are everywhere. And they're a real problem for farmers because, you have, farmers and you have ranchers that had animals, and the termite mounds are an issue for them. Because they're so prolific that you can't get rid of them. There's nothing you can do about it. You just have to work around them. Yeah. And so that part confirms where they were, because the mounds are just the same kind of mounds. They're not any different. But more specifically, going back to the John and Clarence part of the photograph, the most important part, of course, is the facial recognition. John's face is a little bit better than Clarence's face. You get more information from him. And we've had a number of forensic investigators.
Mike, is that because of the facial hair, the beard, mustache?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, John has more face to examine, and what they do is they have data points, ears, nose, eyes, mouth, lips, all the parts of a face, and they digitize everything, and then they compare it to known photographs of John and Clarence. And most recently, and again, this is in the book, Ident TV, which is a very highly regarded, very high-tech company that uses a lot of advanced technology, identified, they did a comparison of John, and then they also added in 1,000 other photographs to have a larger sample for the technology, for the software to go through. And it found John to be 99.7 in the photograph compared to known photographs. And then what they also did was they aged the photograph, meaning they advanced them in, being from a known age to, at this point, they would be, older. They would be, 75. So this is 13 years after the escape. So they aged them 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, it was a 99% match with the age photograph compared, to this photograph.
So, Mike, I got a question about that. This is 1974, 75, and that
around that time, yes.
Okay,
Right.
so they're both in their middle to latter 40s, probably like 45 to 47, somewhere around there.
Around there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Okay. Do we know if this is the last time they were seen, or do we know that there was contact? I guess I'll use that word, with John and Clarence after this photo may have been taken. Do we know if there was substantial contact with the two guys after this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Talk to me about that. Where and when?
So when Fred Breezy, which I have the photo here, this is when Fred Breezy came to meet, and that's Uncle Man with the blue jacket.
Oh yeah, the blue
hat.
flannel shirt. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's Fred Breezy in the center. Well, when he came to meet with the Anglin family in 1992, he was still in contact with John and Clarence in Brazil. In fact, he was sending information to them. He even tells it in the interview, and we have it on recording, where he was still in contact with them in 1992. So they were still down there.
I've actually heard that recording, Ken. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it may have been the recording either took place in the presence of John and Clarence's mother, or she was nearby.
Well, no, my grandmother was already dead. My grandmother died in.
Oh, okay. So who's was it your mother that was there?
Yeah. So if you're looking at this photo, let me kind of get it into. You can see there is a tape recorder.
I see a female hand. Is that your?
Yeah. And
that's your mom's hand?
Okay. Hand. Yes.
Gotcha.
And she recorded the interview that they did, or the talk that they did. They actually met with him before that, but no one recorded it, so we don't really kind of know what was said. But she did record that. It's about a 45-minute meeting that they have, and in there he tells.
He was quite deep. Oh, I heard it. Oh, yeah, brother.
He shares
I heard it. He was very, very detailed
about where this farm is at, different parts of it. But he did say he was still in touch with them. So, 1992, they were still down there, and he was still in touch with them.
When we spoke before we went on the air, I asked you about Fred Breezy and his significance here. He's an interesting character, just from a character study standpoint, because he's not really a hardened criminal, but he makes his living as a pilot, but he's doing illegal or illicit activity for cash. Like he's flying people to, undisclosed locations.
Yes.
He's dropping people off. He's involved in the drug business. He's involved with gangsters peripherally, but he doesn't have his hands completely dirty yet. So he's kind of walking that tightrope between the legit world and the criminal world.
Yes.
How does he manage this? And when does Shangri-La end for him?
Well, that would probably be on his death. He died not too many years after meeting with the Anglin family. He died in the late 1990s.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I would say he lost a lot of his wealth and his family when he got caught in 76, and he wound up spending 10 years in prison, and ultimately it cost him his marriage to Judy and his two sons,
Yeah.
And, he pretty much kind of came out. He didn't have a whole lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And he winds up moving to Belize sometimes after he met with the Anglin family. And eventually he passes away, and he's buried in Utah today.
Mike Lynch, there's always a woman involved in the story. My question for you, young man, when John and Clarence finally made it off the rock, was there any attempt to contact their former female loves?
Well, for Clarence,
there was couple of them.
He was more of a dater. He was not a serious I want to marry you kind of person, it seems. Right. He was kind of a ladies' man, good looking guy. You see photographs,
sure.
he looked really good.
Both of the brothers were, let's be honest about it. I'm a guy, but look, they were good looking guys.
Right. And Clarence could play the guitar. He was kind of smooth, charming. And so he had a lot of lady friends, and that seemed to suit him quite well. Whereas for John, it's a totally different story. When he was in school, he meets Helen, who was the love of his life. He just fell head over heels, and same for her. Her family had money, and they didn't. And these boys were always getting in trouble. They were the Anglins, wrong side of the tracks. And the father really tried to separate the two. Worked for a while. He sends her away to another city. She eventually marries a guy, probably family pressure, he's an upstanding guy, he's better family, but she didn't love him. She wasn't happy with him. And then they eventually move back to Ruskin. And when they do, John immediately pursues her. And while when they rob the bank, he tells her that he has to leave. He doesn't say what happened, but she knew something had happened, but he didn't say what it was. And they go up to Ohio with Alfred, who's married at this point, and then Clarence and Helen's sister, Ruth. And they go up to Ohio because that's where Ruth and Helen's father is at this time. And they hide out there for a while. Well, when they're hiding for a few days, Helen calls her husband, Jim, to tell him where they are.
Yeah.
And then as soon as he gets off the phone, Jim calls the authorities, and then the next morning the FBI come and find them. So John wanted to marry her. John wanted to bring her to Mexico because they were going to work with Mickey Cohen at the time to continue their growing marijuana. And that obviously didn't work out. And then we have prison letters that John wrote that Helen was still pursuing John, and she was going to wait for John however long it took. And John was telling his mother, tell Helen to let him go. There was no future for him. It wasn't going to happen. And he was doing it because he was trying to spare her the waiting and the misery and just this kind of a life that would not have been happy for her. And eventually when they went down to Brazil, he knew he could never go back. He knew he couldn't bring Helen with him because that's a risk. And eventually he and Clarence do marry in Brazil. Fred Breezy talks about that when he does the meets with the family, and they had at the time they had 7 children between them.
Mm-hmm. Jim, if you're out there, you prick rat bastard, you ruined the love life for this guy. Anyway, I'll tell you what. Look, if and I'm one of those guys, and I'll just tell you guys, I don't like the government. I think I would love them if they told the truth, but they're lying prick bastards. Okay. And you can't believe them. So I'm with John and Clarence on this one. You know what? If you got away, good for you. If you found love, good for you. We don't know do we know if they're still alive?
No, I don't believe either one of them are still alive. Maybe John, but the chances are of them both being alive, no.
Okay. They'd be at 93, 94 at this point.
Oh, okay. So they'd have to be up in it. By the way, I don't know if you guys know this. There is actually one living, surviving Alcatraz inmate left in the United States of America. He's 99 years old. And his name is, I'll tell you right now because I have it. His name is Gregory Hops Hopps. Gregory Hopps.
There's actually a second inmate that's still alive. His name is William Baker.
Bill Baker. I know that name. Well,
Yeah,
he's
Baker.
refresh me. I know that name. Go ahead.
Well, he was at
I
Alcatraz.
thought that he passed, but okay.
No, he's still
If
alive.
he's
He actually
alive,
goes to
good
the
for him.
island from time to time. He's written a book about his experiences. He was there
Terrific.
from 56 or 57 to 1960. He left just before John and Clarence arrived, but he was there when Frank Morris and Whitey Bulger were there. And we're actually trying to meet with him and get his, kind of share stories and what he knew of the time and so forth. But so there are two, and I think there's a guard that's still alive. Oh yeah, we just found out that
my understanding that was I know that for certain that Gregory Hopps is a former Alcatraz inmate. He's 99. I thought Bill Baker, William Baker, I thought he passed.
Still alive.
And the guard, I had no knowledge of the guard. I didn't know there was still a guard around.
Yeah, Charles Herman was a guard who was actually there the night of the escape. He was the one that was patrolling the prison the night of the escape. He's still alive.
He must have been
he's in Arizona
young
now.
guy. That's another thing, Ken. I heard that the guards there were like really young guys.
Some of them were. They were different ages, but I mean, there were some that were fairly old, but there were a lot of young guards.
I heard that they hired young guys because they could get them cheap.
That I don't know.
No, I mean I'm not being facetious. I'm not at all being facetious.
No, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, man. The story of Alcatraz, it has legs. It's one of these stories that has legs, just keeps on running.
Yes, it will be around for a long time.
It sure the hell is. Thank God, I got plenty of room for Alcatraz shows here. I'll do an Alcatraz show once a month if you guys come back.
We'll come back.
The book is Alcatraz: The Last Escape, written by Ken Widner and Mike Lynch. They put it together in a concise, common sense, no bullshit kind of way, folks. So you want to read the story the way it happened? Alcatraz, The Last Escape. That's how it happened. Ken, what's up next for you?
We've got a couple of irons in the fire. We're tracking down, hopefully, relatives in Brazil. We've got people actively down there pursuing our relatives, and we've got some other things in the work with other media. So we're hoping something might happen one day.
Brother, let me tell you something. I have an inside connection to Elvis. No, I'm not even kidding. I'm not even kidding. If you ever want to do an Elvis as a live show, I got the scoop on that shit.
Sounds good.
Yeah, for real. For real. Mike, what's up for you, brother man?
Well, Ken and I are kind of joined at the hip with the Alcatraz story. So, we're working on this together. We're, because at the end of the book, we talk about how they had children and were married. And so that's the next step for us, is trying to find the family members and definitively prove it's them. And then it's case closed.
Well, I will tell you that Amelia is joining me again. She is about an hour from Ruskin, Florida right now. She's in Wesley Chapel, Florida, about an hour away. And Amelia says, I would love to have them back for another show. Well, ask and you shall receive, kid, because I'm going to bring them back for another show. Excellent. But right now, time constraints are what they are. I have to say goodnight to Ken Widner and Mike Lynch, the authors of Alcatraz, The Last Escape. Get the book, and if you can't get it, let me know, and I'll get it for you. Gentlemen, take care. Have a great night.
Thank you
Ken Widner. For Mike Lynch, I am the Mad Dog. Join me tomorrow as we go deep inside the nursing home crisis. It's going to be a humdinger. Take care, folks. God bless. We'll see you tomorrow night. Bye-bye.